Um, Amber is a dedicated Riverwoods field lab manager at Florida Atlantic University's Center for Environmental Studies. A proud South Florida native, Amber has always been deeply connected to the outdoors, a passion that shapes her work and lifestyle. She holds a bachelor's degree in geoscience from Florida Atlantic University and is on track to graduate with her master's in environmental science from FAU this spring. Amber's journey in environmental science began in 2006 as a field technician on the Kissimmee River Restoration Project. Her commitment to this landmark initiative, aimed at restoring the ecological integrity of the Kissimmee River, eventually led her to her current role managing the Riverwoods Field Lab. Amber is not only an experienced scientist, but also an enthusiastic educator. She runs the Riverwoods Outreach Program, which she will be describing tonight. As the U.S. Coast Guard Master Licensed Captain of FAU's Kissimmee Explorer 2 pontoon boat, she transforms the vessel into a floating laboratory, immersing participants in the ecology of the restored river. Students also engage in bird diversity and abundance surveys, documenting the return of wetland bird species to the region. Amber's efforts extend to running programs for adults and educators as well. Amber's outdoor lifestyle and passion for restoration ecology were recently highlighted in a docuseries by the Everglades Foundation, showcasing her commitment to South Florida's unique environment. Through her leadership and outreach programs, Amber continues to inspire the next generation of environmental stewards, bridging education and conservation at one of Florida's most significant sites. So, Amber, I'm going to turn this over to you. And
I missed out on the whole introduction. And
Yeah, Scott gave you a great introduction.
okay. So, hello everyone. And like I said, I just missed out on all of that. And I'm sure I know I gave him a little bit of a bio, so I'm sure he gave you quite the extensive background on me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program at Riverwoods. So, I created a presentation, and this is focused more on our actual education program and a little less on the restoration project itself. But again, this is open for any discussion. Please, speak up. Is it okay for me to share my screen? I
Absolutely.
won't probably be able to see you, so if you have a question, feel free to just speak out. And I will go through this. All right. Can you see my screen? All right.
Yes.
Okay. Let me go to, excuse me for 1 minute while I try and get, oops. All right. Sorry, there was a lot of fumbling there trying to get back on the internet. Okay. Are you seeing the regular show, or are you seeing the presenters show?
We're seeing what you put up there.
Okay. All right. So, as Scott probably mentioned, my name is Amber Moore. I am the Riverwoods Field Lab Manager for Florida Atlantic University's Center for Environmental Studies. We are here today to talk a little bit about the Kissimmee River and the Riverwoods Field Lab and everything that goes with it. All right. So a little backstory on myself. When I was a wee lad, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I went to Palm Beach Community College, and I took an elective course called environmental science. And the gentleman, if you're from South Florida, you may or may not know, in this picture in the top right is Lawrence Glenn. he was an adjunct professor and he was working on the Kissimmee River Restoration project for South Florida Water Management District. And so obviously, while he was teaching the course, he talked a lot about the river and the restoration. And I thought, oh, that's what I want to do when I grow up. Move forward a couple of years or a year or so, I received my associates from Palm Beach Community College and thought, well, it's time for me to get a big girl job. So I contacted Lawrence and asked if I could use him as a reference to be for a water quality position at South Florida Water Management. This was, just to take water samples. I wanted to be outdoors working to help with the environment. And he responded with, no, because I have a job here for you. And that brought me in to working as a field technician on the Kissimmee River, supporting the Water Management District's scientists who were doing the ecological monitoring. The lady in the middle, in the bottom picture, in the blue shirt, that is Louisa Kerwin. So I was hired in by CES, Louisa here. She is the founder of the Riverwoods program. She ran it for 30 years. I started working for her in 2006 as a field technician under this Riverwoods contract and with Lawrence out in the field. And I worked my way up, received my bachelor's from FAU, and then became an environmental scientist. So I have a science background. I'm out there collecting the data. You can see in the picture, getting muddy and dirty and handling all the good stuff and not so much around people. Then in 2020 and 2021, the pandemic hits and Louisa has a decision that she would like to retire and enjoy life, as a lot of people decided, but she wasn't going to retire unless I took the position of Riverwoods manager. And in my naive self, I said, sure, I know the river. I can figure this one out. Little did I know how much education and outreach went into this position. And so the education and everything that we do here is again tied into the Kissimmee River Restoration Project. And if you're not familiar with it, which I imagine it looks like most of you are from Florida, have some familiarity with it. It is the Northern Everglades because it's tied into the Kissimmee Okeechobee Everglades watershed. It's all one. It's all part of the South Florida Water Management District, which is all one watershed. And when it came to fruition, this was the world's largest river restoration project. And it still today can be debated. Everybody has their little stipulations of why their river is the largest river restoration, but this one is the largest river restoration for this type of ecosystem. And I'm proud to be a part of it. So Riverwoods Field Lab, that's owned by South Florida Water Management District, and it is located on the Kissimmee River. This is an image. Forgive my elementary skills here, but I wanted to just kind of show an image of it. This is a picture off of Google Maps, and then I doodled on it. The Riverwoods Field Lab was a residential neighborhood that South Florida Water Management District had to purchase, knowing it was going to be flooded. Now that my squiggly red line is that 5-year flood line where once the backfilling had been done and the restoration is going on, we knew this area was going to be flooded. So water management just decided to buy back the entire facility or neighborhood and converted it into a facility. And it's being used as a field lab, and I like to call it more of a biological station and also an education center. So we have a research house that researchers stay in, our field scientists who come up. That's where I started many years ago. When I'd come up, I'd do 2, 3, maybe 4 days of field work in a row. We sleep in that house. There's also an office location. That's where I'm located now. And there's a wet lab where we hold chemicals and samples, and we can do some minimal work there, but that's our remote lab out there. And then we have the visitor center. And the visitor center is what I'm here to talk about a lot today, and what we do with the visitor center. And again, all of these were residential houses that have been converted into these different buildings for different purposes. So our education and outreach programs, we do a plethora of things. It's located in Loretta, Florida. Again, Riverwoods facility is located in Loretta, Florida. And the visitor center has a classroom. It has 3 bedrooms, so we consider it kind of like a bunkhouse. 2 of the bedrooms each have 7 beds in it, and 1 bedroom has 2. So we call it the boys' room, the girls' room, and the chaperones' room. And then again, it was a residential house, so there's a full kitchen. The classroom, we do presentations, all sorts of things. And also, it's not just for what you think primary students. It's also for interagencies. We have Florida Trail Association who comes out, and they use they use the building for doing workshops and other things besides what I'm here to talk about today. And then you can see some of our different options that we do through CES and offer. We have a paddle program, and then our pontoon I'm about to go into more detail about. So CES has created a comprehensive student field studies program for upper elementary, secondary, and university students to explore the Kissimmee River via the pontoon boat. Students participate in activities that enhance the STEM concepts. CES has developed Kissimmee River Restoration Project lessons that teach students how to graph and analyze their data. And we host classes on the boat, so it's like a floating classroom. The number of students reached in our student field studies program from 2014, it has been over 3,000 students. And in 2024 alone, we did 9 trips totaling 143 students. This is just one example, this image here of the type of participants the students will have. These students came from inner city Kentucky, and they were partnered with Pine Jog through FAU with a grant and came out for the day. These students have never stepped in a wild river. They came from concrete, asphalt, buildings. This was all brand new to them. We just last Thursday had students from St. Edward's High School in Vero. And the week before, we hosted Southern Florida College undergrad students. So we treat and host many different types of groups. So as I mentioned, the pontoon is used as a floating classroom, and students participate in many STEM concepts, and we use that boat to collect field data, and we test water and conduct bird diversity and abundance surveys, wetland plant identification, dip netting for aquatic invertebrates and fish, reptiles, and forgive me for putting amphibs, that's amphibians, but I didn't have space. So while we're doing these different types of surveys, we're teaching these students all different types of things while out there. So first we do a bird survey. and we have a designated route. It is a river. You can only go upstream and back downstream. So as we go upstream, the students are given binoculars and ID sheets. And this is when we open up the discussion on how to ID. You know, what are you looking for? The color, the shape, the bill. We talk about the different sounds, the calls they make. And they really learn how to just ID a bird and their characteristics, their flight patterns, and the different, and we teach them little tricks on how to remember these different birds when they go back and maybe see one fly by. So we have a data sheet. They are responsible for collecting the abundance and diversity. So they check off the birds they see. They use tally marks, so we can also have a count, not just that they saw it or didn't. And then we go over that once we've done our hour trip of bird watching and just looking at the plants. And in the background, I'm telling them about a little bit more about the restoration. But we explain, we talk about the birds they've seen and what type of birds they are, that they're wetland birds, and that's a good sign, and why that's important. And we explain to them that they're doing citizen science. But then it also leads into, okay, you did citizen science, but there are scientists out here doing a lot of these same types of studies. And we explain the different types of studies that are going on. For instance, the transect, we tell them about helicopters and the different techniques that are used. So they get really excited about doing that type of work. We also then start talking about plants. And again, a lot of this kind of all incorporates along the boat ride also, but I try to focus the different things so that they and keep it cohesive. So when we're talking about plants, we explain that what we want to see are wet prairie grasses and a broadleaf marsh. And there's also hardwood swamps down at the base end. So then, that goes into the conversation of what's the difference between a marsh and a swamp. We talk about natives and exotics and invasives, and that leads into plant management and how do you manage those and why those natives or exotics or invasives are there, and how can we manage them. We also do speak about plant anatomy because that's how you ID. We have ID sheets when the students get out in dip net. We also make them each collect a plant, and then we talk about how you're going to ID that particular plant. We also have worksheets for nature journaling, so they can draw that plant. And it just helps teach them observation skills. And this picture here, I got to point out. So this young lady holding the plant, this group was National Geographic students who won the opportunity to learn how to do storytelling with photography. So there was a group that came out and they had to do a whole presentation and went up to DC and gave their presentations. Fantastic kids. We do dip netting, and when they're dip netting, they're going to find the fish, the reptiles, the amphibians. So we identify these. We again discuss abundance and diversity and the populations and why we want to see what populations we want to see and why. We also talk about the significance of the baby fish, because they're usually going to catch the little ones. We find a sandbar and they dip net behind it. So they're finding the little fish, and we explain to the importance of, well, if there's little fish, that means the big fish are breeding. And if the big fish are breeding, that means the habitat's right. And we discuss study techniques with them also on here. So this image in the middle of the two people with the throw trap, those are actually my field technicians. They are doing the work that I started out with. So this is a prey availability study. So we talk about that with the students and explain how all that goes. And you know, these different techniques. The lady on the right is holding a siren, which they're coming back in big numbers, greater sirens, which is a great thing. So we talk about that, and occasionally you'll have one or two of those caught with the dip nets with the students, which is so much fun. And then we also go into invertebrates. So the fish, the amphibians and reptiles, and the invertebrates, we also have data sheets that they have to mark down what they are finding. So they have to identify them. And then we, you know, teach them about the safety of certain species, including the water scorpion. We tell them, don't pick them up and put them in the bucket quickly. Don't play around with them. We also have rules about snakes. No touching snakes, no matter if you think you know what kind it is, only because we just don't want to risk misidentification. But with the invertebrates, we talk about life cycles, which then also talks about and leads into water quality discussions for us. So this student right here, he's holding one of our little magnifying boxes. Once they've collected their samples with their dip nets and buckets, they come back on board and we divvy them out, and they have to identify with we have ID sheets. They have to identify them, but then there's fun facts that go with them. So then they have to tell the class the fun fact about whatever species they have found, and then they pass them around for everybody to look at. So this also leads into water quality. We then take the boat once the students are back on board, and we go back to some deep water, and we start doing water quality and explain the importance of the different things and the parameters. And again, because we are the Northern Everglades, and how this is all tied into the Greater Everglades. And I like to tease the students who are coming from downstream of us, especially the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area. I like to tease them and say, if you tinkle in this water, you might be drinking it tomorrow, just to get that concept to sink in. And they all get a chuckle out of that. So we use, you know, we explain pH. I'm not a chemist, but I do my darndest to help out with that and explain the importance of how, you know, the pH balance with these invertebrates and their, you know, the calcium shells, and how, you know, acidic levels will damage them. So that's important. We explain dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen, a lot of our participants do not even know what dissolved oxygen is. They never even thought about that concept. We also talk about turbidity and how we use a Secchi disc and show them how that works. And with the dissolved oxygen, we use a YSI probe, you know, the exact same one we do when we're doing actual science collection. I borrow the scientist YSI. And then all of this is going on a data sheet, and they're collecting weather conditions, and I explain to them why would weather conditions matter. You know, if it's windy or not, if it's cloudy or not. It makes them start thinking all about how everything's connected. And then I remind, what measurement are we using? Okay, you told me we are at 7.28 for dissolved oxygen, but 7.28 what? And I get feedback a lot from the teachers of that is the constant battle with them. So I'm glad to be reinforcing that. And then we also talk about nutrients, because again, it's the Northern Everglades. It's feeding into, it's all part of one watershed. And what is the nutrients and what's happening in this wetland? And it is, if you're not familiar, we are 40,000 acres of restored wetlands, which Mother Nature's doing her thing and absorbing those nutrients in those plants. She's also slowing that water down and allowing the aquifer to absorb and be recharged. So we're doing a good thing out here, and we want to show students positivity. We know there's there's damage and there's things happening, but this restoration project is a step in the right direction, and how to take these concepts and apply it somewhere else. So that's a nutshell of the different parameters we talk about while out on the river. And again, we also incorporate everything is connected, like a web, a food web. And I try to explain, I explain it over and over again that it's not a chain, it is a web. Everything is connected in one way or another. And I didn't really put on here, but I always give a presentation to the kids beforehand and really kind of just go over the restoration project and the ecology of it before we go out and do all the hands-on stuff. So it's a little easier to give them a quick, brief presentation, so they see pictures and understand visuals. Then we go out there and apply it all. So the next thing is our paddle program. Now this is it's been around for a while, but it's kind of fell off for a minute, and we are just now starting to vamp it back up. My assistant is working really, really hard to put this program back together. We just had, forgive me, I'm not a paddler, but the Blue Way has been designated on the Kissimmee River. A lot of the paddle programs or associations have been working to make maps and make it accessible for folks. We have kayaks and canoes, so we're wanting to help encourage it. We've been using the kayaks and canoes as alternatives for times when the conditions are not where we're not able to bring the pontoon out. One of the things is the pontoon is a licensed U.S. Coast Guard licensed boat, and you must have a licensed captain on board. I am now licensed. For about a year, we were without a licensed captain, so I had to pay a vendor captain, and that got very expensive, and it was very limiting to who I could take out. So that's why I went and got my license, so that now we don't have that problem. But during that time, I used the kayaks instead of the pontoon, and I could drive the pontoon to a sandbar and use it as a floating lab as long as it was not running and anchored up. So we had the students kayak to the pontoon at a sandbar and still use it as a floating classroom. They just didn't get to go for a boat ride. So, we try to do what we can to make it work. We also do just adult eco tours where we take anybody who's interested in coming out. I just 2 weeks ago took out a local neighborhood group who just wanted to know more. They were local fishermen, and they were out there all the time, and they had lots of questions, so they wanted to come out and get answers. They were a fun group. We have the Audubon Society comes a lot. We have the Florida Trail Association, just anybody who's interested and wants to go for a boat ride. We also do that. In 2024, we did 35 of these tours with approximately 420 guests. It's a pretty it's a nice boat ride. People like to just go for a boat ride, and we'll take it. I also offer offsite presentations or Zoom presentations. And this image here was in January. These are Japanese exchange students at the Jupiter High School. They came over for 2 weeks and were here to learn about environmental science and the management in South Florida. Really, really fun group of kids. It was interesting for me. So we do a lot of international things. We have a lot of international students that come over. But this is just an example of one of the types of options we have for offsite presentations. And then we also have online educational resources. So our website at fau.edu or ces.fau.edu/Riverwoods, you can find just ID sheets if you're interested for yourself. There's lesson plans, there's videos. We have a lot of times what I like to show is a 12-minute video called Kissimmee River Then and Now. It's a YouTube video. You can Google it. It's just 12 minutes, and it's the river restoration project in a nutshell to date. It was put together by our department, and I like to use that as our informative, quick. Here's what we're gonna go see type video and why. The image in this slide is our classroom inside the visitor center. Those students there are geoscience students from FAU. They had a geopath camp for a week long, and they learned all different types of things tied into geoscience, and different professors came out with FAU. So that's just an example of what the visitor center can be used for. And then our only real social media right now is Instagram. We may pick it up a little bit more in other areas, but for now, we're a small team, and I'm just trying to keep us going. We're just now starting to grow a little bit and be able to start taking on more projects that we had on our wish list. So some of the challenges of our program right now, the environmental conditions. So the river channel can fluctuate anywhere between 8 to 11 feet in difference in stage throughout the year. And so just having the right amount of water to get out there, sometimes we can't. And so we're limited there. The capacity of our boat, our pontoon boat, can be an issue and a challenge sometimes. For adults, it's a maximum of 16. And for students, as long as it's high school or below, I allow a maximum of 18 guests. That includes the chaperones. And that's because students are usually weigh a little bit less than adults. Because again, we are Coast Guard certified, so we do have a max capacity, and I am not going to play around with that. So that is so 16, a lot of classes we can handle, but when you have middle school, public high school, sometimes 16 is a limiting factor. Because class sizes can be much larger than that at times. Also, the location. We are very rural. We are Central Florida, and it can take a while to get out to us. I think St. Edward said that was a little over an hour drive for them, which is not that bad. But if we get somebody from Fort Lauderdale, you're talking 2.5, 3 hours one way. So that can be a limiting factor for a day trip. And then also funding. I mentioned Louisa was my predecessor. She handed this program over to me in it would have been, let's see, I would have started January of 2022. So we would have had a full year of pandemic shutdown. And this is a fee-based program for the most part. There is a little bit of funding from South Florida Water Management District. And when I say little, I mean very little towards this particular program. So I came in with zero funds and then nobody coming out because of being a pandemic and not being allowed to for about a year. But I still had overhead costs. I still had insurance to pay for. Then all of a sudden everybody wants to come out. And like I mentioned, with the boat captain being an issue, not having one for about a year, my vendor cost was 3/4 of what I was charging. And so I was not making any money off of that. We are slowly now starting to build it back up. I refuse to raise our rates. It's I don't want to limit those who can come out. And also for a while I had to say no to those groups that we typically wouldn't charge. Those inner city kids, there's certain groups, nonprofits that we just want to educate. We're a nonprofit. We're not here to make money, but we do need to make enough to support the program. So I'm here for any ideas or suggestions on that. And also, I'd like to say thank you.
Great, thank you, Amber. This has been a great introduction to this. I'm gonna put you back on gallery so I can see if anybody's got some questions here. Why don't you raise your hand, either literally raise your hand so we can see you, or you can use a little icon here. This will be our Q&A period. Susan, you got your hand up.
Hey Amber, thank you so much. This just seems like so much potential here. It's great. Congratulations on getting your captain's license, by the way, and all that neat stuff. That's great stuff. Um, the first thought that came to my mind when I started to see this, aside from the fact that I want to come up, just I would do it for a day trip,
Mhm.
but or see if we could stay overnight in the house. I didn't, so a whole bunch of thoughts, rent out a room for the night. Um, the Sierra Club runs quarterly uh, for the entire state, quarterly. I don't even know what they call it. It's too late at night. I'm blanking, but quarterly meetings. And they'll go somewhere where there's an activity, and then they do need to have some sort of an office space with Wi-Fi so that people can call in for people who couldn't make it. I can't imagine there would be enough room in the houses for, 20 or 30 Sierra people to come. But what other lodging might there be in the area, if any? Are there any campsites or any motels?
So Riverwoods itself, so the visitor center can sleep 16 in beds. Um, so next week we have a paddle group that is coming. They're bringing like 40 people and they're going to be tent camping, and they're bringing in some kind of wash station because the house has 3 bathrooms, but for 40 people that's not enough. So they're going to do some tent camping as not, and only the volunteers are going to be staying in the house. But there are campsites along the way that are primitive camping, that are all district land, and those are actually free, I believe. South Florida Water Management District. Um, so Sebring and the town of Sebring and the town of Okeechobee are our closest towns, and they're about 20, 30 minutes away from Riverwoods, and both of them have hotels there. So
Cool.
we just had an interagency workshop that was 2 days long, and the group was staying at Sebring at one of the hotels in Sebring. So there are definitely options there, and like you said, for Wi-Fi and people that can't attend in person, the classroom can handle that. We have a big projector screen that hooks up to the computer for zoomed in people for conference type style work. Like I said, we host a lot of just workshops. They may not even want to go on the boat, but they're there using the facility. And I'll give a presentation if they ask. It is because it's South Florida Water Management District's property. I host a lot for just them. Just using it for the day or a couple of days. And that interagency one was all the water management districts, but it was being hosted by South Florida Water Management District.
Thank you.
Peter, let's go to Peter and then Ryan. Peter, you're on mute there. Peter, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. So the water quality, the Kissimmee apparently, just looking at Google, getting familiar with it, it's headwaters for Okeechobee, right? Which means it's headwaters for the whole Everglades system. So I'm just kind of wondering about what you find on the water quality that's coming into Okeechobee. I'm aware that there's a lot of agriculture on the south side of Okeechobee, which causes a tremendous amount of pollution. But just coming in along the Kissimmee, what kind of water quality is there from whatever's north of that, right?
Okay, so this is a common question. So the Kissimmee River itself is fed by the headwaters, which is Kissimmee, Orlando area, upper chain of lakes. So that water feeds into the system. Now, prior to the restoration, that was a channelized C-38 canal that was a straight pipeline. And what was on the sides of that canal was all cattle ranches. That's why we can say that, that is why this is one of the world's largest restoration projects and is
Right.
successful, because it was so rural and it was only a cattle ranch down the sides of it that was being converted back. So with that, we now have backfilled 22 miles of that C-38, that straight pipe with no filtration, and converted it into 40,000 acres of wetlands. So it's now absorbing. There was, in the beginning with that first influx and flush across the system, but that there was concern there would be nutrients from those cattle ranches. But we've seen the vegetation just take over and doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Backfilling was complete in 2020, summer of 2021. And
Wow. Okay.
by summer of 2022, you cannot see where the canal was. It's all changed, and which is why we encourage people to come out on the boat and see it. And that's why I give the brief presentation beforehand and show pictures, because you would not understand the concept that the canal was here when you're out there on the boat, what you see. I have to point it out. I stop the boat and I say, look to your left, look to your right. that's where the canal was. And you don't know it because the environment has just taken it back. So the nutrients that are there are being absorbed by the plants that are out there. So we've added 40,000 acres of filtration before
Right.
that water hits Lake
So
O.
have they reduced the amount of cattle that's in the area as well, or?
There's no more, yeah, so the water management district had to buy back. And I meant to mention that with one of my slides, I had the Army Corps and South Florida Water Management logos on there, and I totally skipped over that. This project is a 50-50 cost share between the two. Army Corps is responsible for construction. South Florida Water Management District was responsible for real estate and ecological monitoring. So real estate, because they had to buy back all that cattle ranch, that 40,000
Right.
acre cattle ranch, but it's actually to date, I think it's 110,000 acres that has been bought back, all part of this restoration. But 40,000 acres of wetlands have been restored for this.
Wow. That's amazing.
But so yes, they purchased back that cattle ranch land. And prior to the construction phase, they leased that land back to the cattle ranchers until it was no longer feasible and said, okay, now you need to move your cattle off. We're going to start construction here.
Right.
So yeah, so there's no longer the cattle there. Those lands have been bought back by water management. And they're now, because it's water management lands, they are now open to the public for recreational use.
Right. So that's state land or federal?
That's state land. South
Okay.
Florida Water Management District, state. Army Corps is federal. So it was a
Right.
50-50 between the two, these are things I explain to groups that come out. And I'm hesitant to say students because it is participants of any age. You're asking these
Right.
questions. This is what I explain to groups that come out and give in the presentation and talk about more. But with students, the younger groups, especially high school and college, I point out, this is a federally funded and a state funded. And then I ask them, where does that money come from? Whose money is that? And they get their wheels turning on, oh, that's mommy and daddy's taxes. That's our money. And so then I explain,
You owe me a boat ride, is what they're saying.
so then I explain to them, and that's how I tie into the ecological monitoring because, okay, so we're spending at this point $875 million to date on this project. We're almost at $1 billion. That's $1 billion of taxpayers' money. You better have a way to show that what you're doing is worth their money and that you're trying to be successful. And if so they came up with 26 key indicators for ecological monitoring that say yay or nay. And I go into those, they're the bird populations,
Right.
the plant populations, and I explain all that. And, depending, again, I adjust it to the level of
Sure. Yeah.
the group that's there. I can simplify it or I can go again. I have professionals who come out. We've had engineers come out, so having that my background of science and knowing the restoration project, I can talk to different levels of knowledge about the project.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Why don't we're kind of got about 5 minutes left. Ryan had his hand up. I don't know if you still got a question. Ryan, you still there?
His question's answered, he said.
Okay, very good.
I'm starting to
thank
look
you.
through the chat.
Good.
Probably just now reading them.
Yeah, I think you answered the question about the charges and things. Here's
Mhm.
a question for you, since we're talking about our Florida Climate Educators Network. Do people talk about climate change in conjunction with what's going on? And what do you tell?
Um, they don't typically talk to me, but I do point things out and get the wheels turning with them. I like to use the example with the swallowtail kites. Paul Gray with Audubon told me about how, the swallowtail kites, they've tracked them going across the Gulf. I'm just going to use the word Gulf. I'm not going to say of which country it is. Um, but and how they have 5 days, and if they can't make it across, then unfortunately they pass. But he did a really good explanation about weather patterns, and we have the swallowtail kites come. They're starting to roost at and congregate on the river. We have a big population of them, not just Fish Eating Creek, where they come, they sit, they fatten up, and wait for that Mother Nature's signals and take off across the Gulf. But if we have climate change happening and weather patterns changing, they may have seen the signal and take off and then hit a wall of a front that wasn't expected and end up not making it across and dying off. So, and these are large populations leaving at the same time. And what is that going to do to these populations if we have these weird, you know, climate changing weather patterns that they aren't aware of or know about? I also, it's I speak a lot about invasives and exotics, and the different things that go on with that, and climate changing, and if we're warming, we don't have the python up in on the river yet. Um, but it's probably going to come. And so these are all these different little things that I talk about, and I get the wheels turning with the groups that I have, um, to just understand that yes, things are changing and we have to think about it. And one thing I didn't really talk about here is, and I do again when I'm doing the restoration talk, um, is hydrology for the river for the restoration project. That is the one key component. And so construction's complete, but we don't say restoration's complete because hydrology is not there yet. And there's one more piece to it, and that's the headwaters revitalization project, which is basically water storage in the upper chain of lakes that feed the system. And there's no time like now that we need to really start focusing on water storage. One for and I explain the importance of the timing and the quantities of the water. About, this time of year, birds are starting to nest in the vegetation just above the water line. And that's because the waters are supposed to be receding because we're in the dry season. Now, what happens when we have climate change, weather pattern that brings in some monsoon, floods out the lakes, and they dump a bunch of water onto the system and it floods all the nests. So there's a lot of climate change conversations that happen with our program.
Great. Thank you so much. We're kind of closing in on our hour here, and I want to respect everybody's time on this. So I want to thank you so much for this. I'm going to show a slide in a minute of what we have planned for next month. But I do want to thank you so much, Amber, for this presentation this evening. And I know Susan dropped a link in there. I don't know if there's another link that you want to put in there for any information, or the one that she put up is sufficient. And maybe you're going to get some interest in some trips out. I hope so. Sound like Sierra might be in the works or something here. And want to really appreciate that. So I'm gonna put up, let's see if I can find the right one that I've got. Okay. Actually, I don't have the one that I want, but so I won't share that one. And but I will bid everyone adieu and hope we'll see you all next month. I will send out a follow-up email with some flyer information about next one. We're going to have a presentation about green schools projects for us, and I think that'll be fun for folks. But I just want to thank Amber again and hope we'll see folks back next month. So thank